I'm a progressive and I don't understand why we don't win every single national election in the US. Hi, I'm a social change psychologist and for the past 20 years have developed, tested, and implemented campaigns that have convinced millions of people to change. So, tell me more. Americans want every progressive policy, like all of them. All of them? Literally all of them. Universal health care, 66% of Americans want it. Raising taxes on the wealthy, 61%. Raising taxes on corporations, 65%. Free public colleges, 63% of Americans want it. Increasing affordable housing, 77%. Free childcare, 76%. The list goes on. Yeah, I've seen polls like those. They've been pretty consistent for decades. Yeah, so why the do Democrats lose any national election when the majority of Americans want literally all of this? I mean, based on this, progressives should be winning by like 60 to 70% in national elections. Exactly. Well, there's a lot of corporate Democratic candidates that call themselves Democrats but don't actually support all of this, and voters tend to see through that. Right, screw them. What about the actual progressives though, the ones who genuinely want these policies? Well, that's a different story. Set aside the DNC and corporate donors that fight against these candidates, the bigger issue is language actually, specifically the S word. Socialism? No, it's called democratic socialism. Doesn't matter. Whether you call it socialism, democratic socialism, or even social democracy, there has been an ongoing, well-funded campaign against the term socialism in the US for nearly 100 years, and they won. Only 36% of Americans have a favorable view of socialism in the US, and it's barely changed for decades. Yeah, but people hate capitalism too. Some do, but not as many. 57% of Americans still have a positive view of capitalism. And when you force them to choose, even more end up choosing capitalism because less than 10% of voters have a very positive view of socialism. Okay, but polls suck, and now you're starting to sound like a corporate Democratic consultant. I get it. Screw those consultants. They don't know what they're talking about, and what they end up doing is hearing people say, I don't want socialism, and then they think people don't want any of these policies that you just showed everyone wants. But that's wrong, and that is not at all what I'm saying. What are you saying then? What I'm saying is Americans want more socialist policies, but they don't want full-on socialism. So when progressives call themselves democratic socialists, a lot of voters think it's full-on socialism and they get scared. Zoran just won in New York City. Yeah, sure, but he won with 51% against the guy that was endorsed by Trump in New York City. Harris won New York City with 68%, Biden with 76%. A progressive that only gets 51% in New York City isn't gonna win nationally. Still don't get it. This is about marketing and psychology. When you're trying to convince people to change, you wanna find the path of least resistance. Get them to agree with you. Insisting on using the term socialism in any way is like forcing yourself to climb a mountain when there's a tunnel you could walk through instead. What's the tunnel? Calling it something else. Look, the most socialist president we've ever had, FDR, he created Social Security, enacted labor protections, and talked about a second Bill of Rights to jobs, adequate healthcare, education, and housing. That sounds like a socialist to me. Right, but FDR never called himself that. He got angry anytime someone called him a socialist and denied it. Instead, he framed the New Deal as a pragmatic way to save capitalism, not overthrow it. And it worked. The 20 years after FDR were the most prosperous for the American middle class. It was the only period in US history where all economic classes grew together. And those economic advancements set the stage for the civil rights movement to flourish. Socialist. Right. Compared to every other president, FDR was by far more socialist. But he understood psychology and understood that the American identity in the most simple sense is more aligned with the idea of capitalism than the idea of socialism. So he created a whole new concept, the New Deal, instead of an unpopular term. And from a social change psychology perspective, this was genius. It's significantly harder to change a negative opinion to a positive one than it is to create a new positive opinion from nothing. So instead, FDR's New Deal was like his blank canvas. He defined what it meant without any baggage or negativity bias. Okay, but progressives want socialist policies. Sure, by definition they are. But dictionaries don't win elections. We don't need everyone to like socialism to enact the more socialist policies, especially since people already like them. We need to stop thinking like economists and start thinking like marketers. Americans just need us to package these policies in some new branding that isn't scary, doesn't have the baggage of socialism, and won't be easily destroyed by the billionaire's right-wing media machine. Ideally, something that sounds like fixing capitalism rather than getting rid of it. Okay, so what should we call it? I'll throw in an idea, but I'm down for whatever the best idea is that doesn't use the term socialism. What's your idea? I like worker capitalism as a form of capitalism that centers around the needs and well-being of the worker instead of what we currently have, which is corporate capitalism. In other words, centering around the corporations and shareholders. But whatever the term is, the point is that us progressives need to stop forcing the most progressive candidates to climb the socialist mountain and instead let them go through the tunnel to victory. The tunnel to victory. That's what social change psychology is all about, finding the tunnel.